To test it out, he moved back into range. A violent gale swiped at him. He met the shaft with frost pain. A tremendous shock went through his arm. His body left the ground. Zenbul had sent a grown lizardman flying with the strength of just one arm. That arm was truly beyond the realm of common sense. The air buzzed with excitement. Witnessing the overwhelming muscular strength of their chief, the warriors roared. Zayusu retreated, splish-splash, using his tail to keep balance. Shaking out his numb hand, he narrowed his eyes slightly. What the heck? He stared guard up at the giant in front of him. Seriously, what? He is so weak. He was tremendously fast. Zayusu would get knocked back if he took blows with his sword, but that was it. Zayusu wasn't scared. Zenbul was just swinging his spear around like a kid with a stick, no real technique. The problem was whether this was really all. With that arm, he seemed like he would have a more precise way to move. Is he not fighting seriously to get him to be careless? Zayusu sensed that was not the case. He was on guard against the unknown and reconsidering his strategy when Zenbul, who hadn't taken a single step, asked him with a grin, "What's wrong? Can get frost pain to work?" That jovial expression was probably meant as provocation. Zayusu wasn't going to respond to that. "I once lost a fight with the guy who used to own frost pain." Zayusu remembered. He knew the male Zenbul was talking about the chief of the now-defunct Sharp Edge tribe, someone Zayusu had killed. Zayusu's focus had been pinpointing Zenbul, but now he expanded it to include their surroundings. In the sea of hostility, the loathing of the Sharp Edge survivors was especially intense. "These wounds on my left hand are from that fight." Zenbul waved the hand with 2 missing fingers as evidence. "Maybe if you use the power he beat me with, you can win. You think so?" Zayusu replied with absolute cool. The power was definitely strong. It could be used only 3 times a day, but it brought victory more often than not. The reason Zayusu had defeated its previous owner was that he had already used it 3 times. If Zayusu had faced the attack back then, he probably would have been killed. But there was no way a guy who knew Frost Pain's power would want to be on the receiving end. Zayusu tensed up. He didn't know he wasn't getting anywhere like this, though. He guessed he should charge. Having decided, he leaped at Zenbul at double his previous speed. The halberd intercepted him with tremendous force. Zayusu didn't dodge, but took the attack with Frost Pain. Everyone watching thought he would get knocked back again. Raised up, Frost Pain clashed with the halberd and simply parried. He didn't even have to use a martial art technique. Zenbul was handling his spear like a child at play. At that level, it was a cinch for Zayusu to parry any attack, no matter how heavy. Zenbul's eyes opened wide in surprise, no admiration. That was the moment Zayusu closed in like a gale force wind. Zenbul could try to bring his halberd around, but he'd be too slow. Even if he had the strength to completely stop the spear and bring it back, it would take a couple of moments, and that was plenty of time for Zayusu to get in close. Frost Pain slashed Zenbul's flesh, and fresh blood flew. A huge cheer went up, along with the tiny shriek of one female. The one scattering blood and retreating in escape was not Zenbul. It was Zayusu, who had 2 bleeding scrapes on his face. Unlike his previous stance, Zenbul came charging after Zayusu, not about to let him get away. He attacked with the same thing he used to gouge at him a moment before, his claws. Frost Pain clashed with them, and a hard metallic sound rang out. A beat later, the halberd made a noisy splash, no longer in Zenbul's hand. Grrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr charged. Compared to the childish way he handled his spear, these strikes with his hand were masterful. Now Zayusu had all the pieces to understand. Zenbal wasn't a warrior, he was a monk who employed a special energy called Kai to transform his body into a weapon. Zayusu met the hand with frost pain. Lizardmen claws were harder and sharper than human nails, but they wear NT so hard that metal wouldn't ring when it hit them. Yes, this was a monk ability that hardened teeth and nails' natural iron weapon. It was said that a monk's fist at the limit of its power could dent adamantite, the hardest metal. But from the feel of Zenbal's, he hadn't reached that level, maybe steel at best. Still, Zayusu couldn't underestimate those claws if they were evenly matched with Frostpain, one of the Lizardmen's 4 great treasures. They exchanged a few blows. Zenbal attacked with his hand, and Zayusu slashed with Frostpain. They evaded each other's attacks, then clashed. A short pause occurred. Haha, Yurei still alive. Zenbul licked the blood and scraps of meat sticking to his fingers. Likewise, Zayusu's tongue, longer than a human S, came out and licked the red liquid flowing from the scrapes on the part of his face that would be a cheek on a human. He was glad he'd been able to just barely dodge the attack meant to pierce his eyes. He had wounds, but they were NT deep. He still had plenty of fight left in him. Zayusu thanked the spirits of his ancestors, and perhaps Crush's spirits helped too. Zenbul complained, "You know, if you don't use that move and I beat you, it'll feel like you were going easy on me." He balled up his fists and bumped them together a few times in front of his chest. "Sorry, but I am not planning on using it. HRMM. No saying you were NT fighting seriously after you lose. Now that you've sparred with me, do you really think I am the type to say something like that? No, I don't sorry, I didn't mean that. But if you not gonna use it, then I am common for you." Voom. With a rush of air, he kicked at Zayusu with one of his thick legs. Zayusu acted without hesitation. He dodged the foot and immediately slashed with frost pain, but the sword was repelled with a metallic sound. His eyes widened in admiration. If a bare-handed attack was blocked with a sword, the attacker would get injured. That was logic, but when a monk used Kai, they altered common sense. This was Iron Skin, a special power that made flesh hard as steel whenever anything came in contact with it by surrounding the body with Kai. Like with natural iron weapon, a trained user could fortify himself. Zenbul repelled the magical sword. That spoke to how much training he'd done as a monk, but Zayusu was sure of his victory. There wasn't such a huge gap in their combat skills. Zenbul had just been at a disadvantage since the beginning. There was an overwhelming amount of attack types: kicking, tail whipping, punching, and clawing. Each of the physical attacks Zenbul unleashed was fast and heavy. Faced with that, it seemed, Zayusu had quit attacking and reached his limit just defending. Chain after chain of hits followed. If Zayusu hadn't been able to block all the weighty, destructive blows, he would have been done for. The surrounding Lizardmen onlookers cheered, confident their chief would win with his continuous attacks. Now and then, Zenbul's claws grazed Zayusu's body. The flesh that should have been protected by his hard scales was easily broken. Blood beaded and flowed. These were definitely not minor wounds, and he had so many they were impossible to count. Zayusu's life was like a candle in the wind. It would be no surprise if he surrendered at any moment. The Lizardmen had smiles on their faces. They were delighted at their champion's victory, but the chief himself felt differently. Each time one of his strikes was repelled, he felt victory slipping further away. He couldn't completely suppress his anxiety. Frost Pain's blade was enchanted. It could deal additional chill damage when it sliced into an opponent. As a secondary effect, it had the power to send some chill damage to an opponent when weapons clashed. In other words, just his hand and the sword bumping together caused him to be weakened slightly. His hands and feet were numb. Little by little, his movements were slowing down. Crap. He lost so quickly last time that he didn't realize it had this power. It wasn't just that one move. It makes sense for one of the 4 great treasures. It was precisely because Zayusu understood these effects that he had chosen to fight defensively, or to put it another way, he chose to fight in a way he was certain to deal damage. This was also why he wasn't evading Zenbul's attacks. He had chosen the cautious path to victory. That prudence made him Zenbul's greatest enemy. When Zayusu leaped at him, Zenbul unleashed a special move. From the moment the Green Claw tribesman blocked it, Zenbul's chances looked pretty low. He felt he was attacking an impregnable fortress on his own. Ah shit, he couldn't get him, but still, he was waiting for this time to come, for so long. A male Zenbul he had once fought flickered through his mind. He hadn't been as strong back then. He kept training in order to beat him someday. When he heard his adversary had been killed, frustration and regret overcame his heart. But he still didn't rest. It was all for this day. As chief of his tribe, he couldn't just abandon everything and go off to battle. That was why he hadn't been able to hide his joy when he heard the owner of Frost Pain had showed up in the village. It wasn't right to end a fight he'd anticipated so much this simply. He punched. He kicked. He gradually lost feeling in his hands and feet. His Kai couldn't reach them. Even so, he didn't stop. He is strong, even stronger than the one from before. He figured this male must have trained ceaselessly just like he had, so their initial gap never closed. He could have made the excuse that he lost due to frost pain, but he didn't want to say anything pathetic. That's right, that's the owner of frost pain, the strongest lizardman male. He didn't stop attacking. At the same time, with the clear-headed part of his brain, he praised Zayusu for blocking his kicks with frost pain. He got wounded, bled, and got wounded again. Keeping a close eye on the fierce back and forth, Crush had seen with her exceptional druid abilities which direction the battle would lean. Amazing, he must have been able to tell right from the start of the battle. She was blown away by Zayusu's exceptional warrior abilities. A cheer went up. It was for Zenbal, who seemed to be overwhelming Zayusu with his repeated attacks. The surrounding lizardmen didn't notice, but the movements of his arms and legs were growing gradually slower. Zayusu was strong. Crush could say that with confidence. Most lizardmen fought by putting pressure on their opponents with their robust physical abilities. However, Zayusu and Zenbal fought with technique, and Zayusu had frost pain to back up his skills. For that reason, the current gap between them was, in large part, due to frost pain. But she could also sense, as the obvious truth, that wasn't everything. Would an average warrior be able to give Zenbal a run for his money like this with frost pain? The answer was no. Zenbal wasn't such a simple opponent. The weapon was powerful, but being able to draw out its abilities completely made Zayusu a first-rate warrior. His greatest talent was how quickly he could read his opponent. He had been able to dodge the blow when Zenbal abandoned his spear, because he had been carefully reading him. He had foreseen that Zenbal had a trump card. The spear was a bluff. How much had he gained on that journey he branded himself to go on? He wondered about the fish preserves and his combat technique. Before she knew it, Crush had stopped questioning Zayusu's victory. She just watched his profile, not with worry, but with something else buzzing in her chest. He's one amazing male. The duel was so impressive that time flew by for everyone watching. The combatants themselves, though, felt differently. Their labored breathing was an unmistakable sign that the physical and mental toll went beyond just the time they spent. It was commendable that Zayusu didn't lose his will to fight despite bleeding from wounds all over his body. There had never been someone who lasted so long in a fight against their chief. That's how the surrounding lizardmen felt. His victory seemed imminent, or so almost everyone thought, when Zenbal wordlessly broke his stance. They were sure he would proclaim himself the winner. As they held their breaths in anticipation, Zenbal raised his voice and did the exact opposite. I lose that Chief's victory should have been right there, so why was he proclaiming his loss? The only one to foresee the result, Crush, bustled into the circle. Are you all right? Zayusu sighed heavily, dropping the sword he'd been clutching, and answered in a voice oozing with exhaustion. Well, none of these wounds will kill me. I don't think they'll be a problem for the upcoming fight, either. I'll cast some healing magic on you. Crush sighed and adjusted her grass clothes with a rustle to reveal her face. Zayusu felt a gradual embrace around him, not the hot pain of the wounds carved into his body from a moment ago, but a pleasant warmth. Giving in to the feeling of health flowing into him, he turned to face the huge lizardman he'd just challenged in that life-or-death battle. Zenbal was surrounded by the members of his tribe, explaining what had happened, what Zayusu's strategy had been. Crush announced after 2 casts that she was done healing him. I guess that's it, and Zayusu looked down at his body. There was still coagulated blood sticking to him, but his wounds were completely healed. When he moved, there was a strange, lingering, pulling feeling. It didn't seem like any cuts would reopen. Thanks, Yurei, welcome, Crush giggled. It exposed her beautiful pearly fangs. Yurei, so pretty, what? Her tail jerked and slapped the water. Then neither of them said anything. Crush was silent because she wondered how this male could say things like that with a straight face. She wasn't used to being complimented. To her, he said too many things that were bad for her heart. Meanwhile, Zayusu didn't understand why Crush had clammed up. He worried he might have said or done something wrong. Honestly, he thought females would never have anything to do with his life. He didn't know how to act. He was doing the best he could, even if it didn't seem like it. Hey, you're gonna make me jealous, damn it. They both turned to look at the owner of the voice, Zenbal. Their perfectly synchronized movements made him falter for a moment. White one, you're not gonna heal me too. He acted normal after seeing her white albino face. She remembered her impression when she'd seen him for the first time and understood. Did that make sense? Yes, but are you sure it's okay? Your tribe's priests 1T get to do it then. Yeah, it's fine. More importantly, it really hurts. It's like I am frozen solid. Can you hurry it up? Only because you said to. Tell your priests that. Okay, I forced you, please. Crush sighed and started casting healing magic. And suddenly Zayusu felt like the number of hostile gazes decreased. Though only a few, some even turned friendly. Okay, all done. She decast more times on Zenbal than she had on Zayusu. His wounds didn't look that bad, but apparently they been deep. So you're more talented than our priests. Thanks. But I don't know if I should know thanks. Okay, both our wounds are healed up, so I guess this is sudden, but do you mind if we jump right into business? Yeah, let us hear what you have to say, is what I was going to lead with, but Zenbal paused with a grin. Alcohol, both Zayusu and Crush were nonplussed. They didn't seem to understand what he said. We need to have tough discussions over drinks. Do you understand? Negotiations went better once the parties knew who was stronger. Zayusu understood risking their lives to figure that out. That was the Lizardman way of life, but he couldn't understand a drinking party. The Green Claw tribe didn't have that custom. What was the point of fighting a life or death battle if this is what came next? No, I don't. Zayusu, tormented by exhaustion, gave a quiet, raw answer. He looked discouraged. Immediately afterward, a surge of regret swept over him. We haven't even formed the alliance yet, and I just reacted to this tribe's chief like a little kid. Crush was giving him a strange look, too. Zayusu had no relationship experience. He had no way to know that Crush's reaction was one of curiosity and tenderness at having discovered another side of the object of her affection. If we drink, we won't be able to think straight. That's no good, Zayusu hurriedly restated. Zenbal didn't seem bothered. Hey, you're a traveler, right? Anyone around here looking for knowledge would go to the dwarves, am I right? No, I didn't do that. I visited the people of the forest. Oh, then remember this, friends become best friends by drinking together. That is a lesson from the dwarves. We don't have much time, but we have to speak frankly, right? Zayusu Shasha. I see, understood, Zenbal Gugu. Okay then, we're gonna drink tonight. Bring it out. Let's get this party started. In a bonfire stand nearly 6.5 feet high, set on dry land, crimson flames blazed so high that they seemed to reach for the night sky. That giant red light kept the darkness away. Placed front and center next to the bonfire stand was a pot over 3 feet high with a mouth over 2.5 feet in diameter. The stink of fermentation drifted on the breeze. Dozens of lizardmen took turns ladling liquid out of the pot, but no matter how many times they scooped, the alcohol showed no signs of running out. This was like Zayusu's frost pain, one of the Lizardmen's 4 great treasures, the giant wine pot. It produced a limitless amount of alcohol, but the flavor was not so great. To a human who knew even a little about alcohol, it would be frown-inducing. But for the Lizardmen, this was high-grade stuff. That was why the drinkers kept coming. A little ways removed from the vessel was an extremely quiet area. It took only a glance to see why. Several drunk Lizardmen lay face down on the ground. They collapsed there and hadn't budged an inch. This was the disposal area for totally wasted Lizardmen. Crush had taken off her clothes and was walking through the area, keeping her eyes on the ground. She watched out for the tails of the Lizardmen lying around. Her footsteps were steady. She didn't seem drunk, but it was impossible to say she wasn't drunk at all. Her tail, just her tail, was cheerfully twisting around with a mind of its own. It curled up and stretched, pointed up and drooped. It was hyper, like a little kid. In reality, it felt like a fresh breeze was blowing through Crush's heart. It may have been partially the alcohol, but that wasn't all. The freedom helped. This was her first time walking among a large group of people with her albino body exposed. Zenbal had a strange appearance too, so, although some were surprised by her at first, soon she was blending right in. She carried food in both hands as she walked, feeling her heart sing. She walked toward where Zayusu and Zenbal were sitting cross-legged on the ground drinking together. They were using shells of a fruit similar to coconuts as cups. The liquid filling them to the brim was clear, but that fermented smell hung thickly in the air. Between them was a large plate of raw fish to snack on. Zenbal grinned at Crush as she walked over. Hey, plant monster, are you ever going to stop calling me that? She'd already taken off the outfit, but But no matter how many times she protested, he would probably tease her forever.